Hi,
Yeah.
Lynn. Hi, Alma Birch.
Amma. Yay.
Hi, friends. Okay, let's wait for the last person to jump in. All right. Oh, last two. Alma Birch says, Dan. All right.
Oh, here we go.
Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's Common Ground. I'm Malvika Jolly, Special Projects Associate here at the Rail, and today I have the pleasure and privilege of welcoming artists Flavio Cerqueira, Karina Aguilera Skvirsky, and Adán Vallecillo, who are joining us today alongside our very own friend and comrade Dan Cameron for a conversation on race, ethnicity, and alterity in Latin American art. They're joined today by the poet Celina Su, who we have in the audience with us, who will be reading to close today's program. So excited to have you and really looking forward. A few quick notes before we get started. We'll be recording this gathering for the Rail archives, so if you would prefer not to be seen, very easy to do. You can disable your camera by pressing the stop video button in the bottom left corner of your screen. Our chat is a place for community, so please feel free to introduce yourself and shout out where you're tuning in from in the chat. And if you have any questions, please drop them there in the chat and I'll call on you to speak during the audience Q&A. Alternatively, I'm also happy to read your question on your behalf, so whatever is comfortable. The Rail team will be here helping out with tech if you have any questions, and closed captions are available by pressing the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It'll be there right between the record and reactions buttons. Finally, we've started out all of our events here with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we are on Lenape, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. And I think it's worth taking a moment to remember that the heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all those who struggle for freedom, in recognition of the fact that when it comes to liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation. So in that spirit, I would encourage you to check out the chat, where I'll drop a living resource document of resources and actions that we've been putting together behind the scenes at the Rail. If you have anything you'd like to add to it, please shoot us an email. But we'll get right into it. Now it's my honor to welcome our wonderful guests of this afternoon. An artist and storyteller, Flavio Cercera creates vigorous figurative bronze sculptures focused on the construction of narratives and representations of actions. He uses everyday objects such as mirrors, books, tree trunks, ramps, stairs, and more to create tension with an out-of-scale bronze human figure. And essentially he uses sculpture as a tool to immobilize the moment of the fragment of a narrative. We'll hear a lot more shortly. Excited to have you, Flavio. He's joined by multidisciplinary artist Karina Aguilera Skvirsky, whose practice began in photography and then expanded rapidly into video and performance. In 2019, she received a grant from Creative Capital supporting her project How to Build a Wall and Other Ruins, which we'll see excerpts from very soon. And she's exhibited this project in solo exhibitions at Museo Amparo in Puebla, Mexico, and Ponce and Robles Gallery in Madrid, Spain, and here on the Zoom with all of us today. And she is joined by the artist Adán Vallecillo, who studied fine arts and sociology in Honduras and Puerto Rico. He now lives in Honduras still, and the methodology of his art practice is strongly based on research, on-site, and combining local, visual, and social aspects of his work, and keeping them, as always, in conversation and in questions. We have New York-based curator, art writer, and educator Dan Cameron. There's a lot to say about Dan and his curatorial works, but for the time being, I'll say that he is our comrade and the editor-at-large here at the Rail. Dan, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Malva. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this panel. I am so excited to be able to do this today. And I especially want to thank Fong and Nick for helping coordinate this, and of course for Malva for leading it, and for all of you for attending. I want to take you back a little bit just to explain a little how I got onto the trajectory that led to today's panel. In 1991, 30 years ago, I organized an exhibition for La Caixa in Madrid. The exhibition was called El Jardín Salvaje. And that was essentially an exhibition of, which means the Savage Garden in English. And it was an exhibition of American artists creating installation-based work. You would know many of the artists in the exhibition. Among them were two friends of mine, good friends from the East Village. One was Felix Gonzalez Torres, whose work you all know, and the other was Meyer Weissman, whose work you also probably know. There was a certain point in the development of the exhibition when I could see a divergence between what the other artists were doing and then what Felix and Meyer were doing. And the more I got to think of it, the more I realized, and this is going to sound really dumb, but I hadn't factored in the fact that Felix was a Cuban refugee who had actually settled in Puerto Rico and later Madrid before coming to the United States. And a lot of his formation as an artist came from that particular experience. So he had some things to say about Spain, not just in the present day, but as an empire, that I was learning for the first time. And of course, Meyer Weissman was from Caracas, Venezuela. And he would soon flee. He would soon move back to Venezuela and then flee to go settle in Barcelona. But he, as well as a member of the former Spanish colonial empire, he had a story to tell. And again, I was a little outside of that. I thought this was just going to be a bunch of American artists. And lo and behold, two of my American artists were Latin American artists. I think later that year, I made my very first trip to South America, to Chile, and I've just been, incredibly engaged and passionately brought into this sort of contemporary Latin American art scene, not because I consider myself a specialist, but because I feel that it's an area of the world in which so much cultural and artistic progress tends to get overlooked or sidelined by sort of the big art capitals like New York or based in Europe or LA. So cut to a year ago. A year ago in the United States, the streets were full of social justice protests after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So the movement for Black Lives galvanized a lot of new thinking in the United States. I think people who had never really paid that much attention to the complexities of our history and how those complexities, and I'll maybe even use scare quotes the second time around, have led to a present day society in which inequity is visible. It's glaringly visible to everyone. And this is based on history. It's based on racial history rooted in slavery. It is also based on a colonial history, but just as much, it's based on the 20th century and all of the upheavals and cataclysms that took place in the 20th century that also spurred migration to the Americas, not America, as we sometimes lazily call the United States, but the Americas. So this is something that I've realized over the last 30 years that most of my fellow Americans not only don't know about, but don't seem to be all that committed to learning, let's say. But I thought, if Americans right now are opening their eyes to an aspect of our history that we were relatively closed to before, for whatever reasons, maybe this is also an opportune moment to broaden this discussion about who are our fellow Americans, who are the peoples that occupy the rest of the Americas, and what are the story they want to tell us about where they came from and how those histories inform contemporary reality. So I'm not a historian and I'm not an esthetician. But I am a curator. And I thought that maybe one way to unlock this conversation and get it started going in a positive direction was through artists whose work I truly and deeply admire, but more specifically in this context, artists with whom I've collaborated. And out of my collaboration with them, I have also expanded my own knowledge about how identity is formed within societies and how that out of that identity, racial, ethnic, sociocultural, economic, art emerges. Not in every case, but in many, many cases. So with that preamble, I really want to just sort of turn to the three artists because they have all done remarkable work, and they've done remarkable work working with me, which is the greatest honor any curator can have when you reach out to an artist and you say, let's do something together. And then what they do far exceeds your expectations. So to our first guest, Flavio Cercera, I actually met, I guess socially would be the right way to say it. We met because he was a protege of my friends, Sandra Cintos, in Sao Paulo, and working into their side studio, and Albano Afonso, sorry, I forgot to mention Albano. And we met and we chatted, and that was really that. And then a couple years later, I started seeing Flavio's work appear, and I was like, that's that guy. That's the person I met. And then we reached out, we became friends, and I invited Flavio about 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years ago, to make his US debut in a project I was organizing in Kansas City called Open Spaces. So I said, Flavio, we've never worked together, but let's give it a shot. And well, Flavio, you take it from there. Welcome. Oh, I think your mute is on.
Now? Can you hear me now? Yes. Thanks, Dan, for inviting me and taking all the Brooklyn Rail family to this opportunity to talk about my work for a non-Brazilian audience and try to speak in English and talk about my experience as a young artist here in Brazil. So my connection with them was weird because sometimes appear a person in front of my studio and rang the bell, and he was then Cameron. We started a conversation, and he has appeared and start to make a conversation in my old studio that was of a couple of artists very famous here in Brazil, Sandra and Albano. And so I don't have many time to talk, and I speak a lot. And in a nutshell, I start to talk to invite to send my material for that and keep in connection and let him know about my work. And in 2018, he invited me, as mentioned now, to make part of Open Spacing, and was my debut in America. And that's my first time that I can have an opportunity to produce a work outside my comfort zone, outside my country, outside my studio, outside my place. It was a challenge for me because, okay, here I know the people, how I know how to find the things, I know how to work everything. So yeah, for me it was very important as a young artist to be part of this show, because I had a great opportunity to have experience with other artists in different level of careers, and have experience to spend 3 months in Kansas City in the United States. And Dan was very patient with me because we changed a lot, and he helped me a lot, and how to build it to build a new piece for this show. And as a sculptor, I used to consider myself a sculptor because I work with bronze sculpture, figurative sculpture in a traditional way. And I used to work with personal histories and personal narratives, invented narratives, and sometimes historical narratives. In this time, I was one of the first artists to arrive in the city, and I had the experience to walk around and met people, and I saw the connection with Brazil and America. America as United States, and a lot of issues that I have here in Brazil, I can saw in Kansas City as social and racial and social and cultural issues. Same is I have in Brazil, in São Paulo, that the place that I live and born, there's a big city, you know. So I decided to bring a image of a young woman, a young girl. That was the first time that I used a female figure, because in my old works, I used to work with a man figures, and that was my first time that I used the female figures. And I tried to bring family recorded memories, because my family came from the north of Brazil, northwest of Brazil, the city called Bahia. In the 80s here in Brazil, we have a problem with drought. And the people from that area from Brazil moved to the south and southwest, run away from the drought period. Trying to escape,
yeah.
You know. So we call the êxodo rural, that we call here in Brazil, and people run away from try to find more opportunities, work opportunity, to try to have a better life. So my mom was pregnant of me. She was 18 years old, and she ran away from that village that she lives, trying to escape from this drought period. So I tried to make an homage of that women of my family, because in that period, women carry a bucket of water on top of her heads to feed the family, you know. So in you know, I know the issues of our society. So I try to change the subject. So I decided to change the bucket of hot water and change for a pile of books, to change the meaning of this kind of feeding, you know, because I understand today that education and information, you can feed yourself, you can feed, and you can get more, how can I say, more opportunities in our society. You know, I understand today, because when you have education, you have a tool for get the more important things in your life. So I'm bringing the process of this work, because I start to modeling a piece in clay, and I make an aerial structure and make a piece in clay, and after I made the cast in silicone and plaster, to take a copy in wax, to make a copy in bronze. Can you put this, flip the next, yes, next image? Yes, thank you. So for me was important, and the great opportunity to cast this piece and try to bring a part of me and my country, my family, to show up for another audience, because for me it was important that, you know, because how can I improve my voice? Because okay, I'm a young artist here in Brazil. Everybody knows the subjects that I used to talk with my work, but in the first time in America, I would like to bring my reality, my points of view to a new audience. You want to say something, Dan?
Well, Flavio, I was actually going to ask if you could tell us where this is, where the images are taken. Well, what is this place we're looking at?
The place, which place that
Yeah, I think just to remind people where this all was done, because you weren't even in Kansas City.
Yeah, I was in Kansas City, in the middle of United States, and I can feel the same problems that I have here, like racism, and the city spread out, and okay, you can see the Black people and the Latin people, as I can see in Brazil, as in the margin of the society, you know, and the service position, not in the, you know, it's very complicated because I can see a lot of similarities in the two countries, because it's very familiar, this kind of situation. And for me, stay in that place because I spent 3 months in KCAI, the Kansas City Arts Institute, to produce this piece. And the piece was installed in another university, UMKC. And for me, to bring that piece, young girl, yeah, with a pile of book in top of her head in a university, bring a figure of a young Black girl in that campus is an important thing for me. Bring to is a representation of people like me, or people like my family, people are around me here in Brazil, because as a Brazilian is very kind to be, because Brazilian is confused by a lot of nationalities, because in our colonization, you can hear Italians, Spanish, indigenous, a lot of people from a lot of countries in Africa. So in Brazilian, we have a lot of diversity in terms of appearance. It looks where we look like a Brazilian person. It's very hard to define how it looks like a Brazilian person. If you try to find in airport or in some place who's a Brazilian guy in middle of that person, it's hard to understand and localization that person in middle of a lot of people, because it's hard to find, because we are very mixed races. So I try to with this work, I try to put inside that campus, inside this city, and that exhibition, bring what I want to say with that piece, what I can express with that sculpture. So I have 2 points. I'm not only 2, but some points, because one of that is the education as an important thing to become something, or to change your life, because I'm came from a very poor background, and with art and education I can change a little bit my life, you know, and can travel and can circulate in an art world here in Brazil, because it's very complicated, because I think 9 or more than 90% of people that produce or live the art life in Brazil came from a high society class. Mm-hmm. You know, I think it's very important to emphasize this, because it's almost prohibited, not in terms of prohibition of these people from the hoods didn't come or could or can take part of this world, but is a lot of is problem that image is just for make a sample of this. This is mm-hmm. the area of my family came is from Bahia, because Bahia is very famous about samba, carnaval, but we have a lot of villages around and outside Salvador. It's very poor, mm-hmm. and my family came from that village.
Okay, Flavio, just for 1 minute more, because we got to move on to the next one. Tell us about the title. Any word but wait.
Any word except wait, because
wait.
Okay, yeah, because in the a lot of books that girl carry on top of her head, there are a lot of meaning and a lot of histories. Yeah. They can accept every single word except wait, because it's time to change. It's time to change. You know, it's time to to start to bring now new perspective for art world, new point of view, new images, you know, new representation, you know, try to new forms to see, to produce, to feel art in this art world.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Flavio. We're going to get back to that, but I want to go on to Karina, so we can kind of stick to a bit of our schedule. But that was so great. Moving along, so before I organized the Biennale Cuenca in 2016, I knew Karina Aguilera Skvirsky's work, but I didn't really know it in the context of Ecuador. And you know, part of the process that they gave me was to spend a lot of time on Ecuadorian artists, both living and expats, artists who lived in a foreign country. And it really wasn't until I started looking more deeply at Karina's work that I realized I didn't know anything about what she was doing, because it wasn't until I got into Ecuador that I really, that the meanings of her work began to really touch me deeply. So with that being said, I want to just pass the microphone over to Karina Aguilera Skvirsky so she can talk about what she did in Ecuador and the context for that. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Super happy to be here. And Malvika, can you share the screen so I can just jump into the work, which I think tells the story. Next slide. So I thought I would start with these two photographs, because it's really why I'm an artist, I think. So on the left side of the screen is a photograph taken in Ecuador, I think in the 1940s maybe, and on the right is a photograph taken in Miami, Florida, I think also in the early 1940s. And so the photograph on the left is my grandmother sitting in the middle. And the photograph on the right is my grandmother and my father. And these photos I found in a drawer, like overflowing with loose photographs when I was about 7 years old in Washington, DC. And I guess like instinctually, I was just drawn to them, like what, you know, without, in a very innocent way, I was trying to make sense of my family, right? And so my family is kind of the entry point I often use I've been using to make work. And so I think it started very young. And so what I started to do is organize those photos that were kind of left there into family albums. You know, I kind of took on that role. Could you show the next slide? And so early on, I think even, you know, I think 7 or 8 or 9, I started to, you know, get cameras that my parents generously bought for me. And I think this is one of the first cameras I ever had. It's like a 110 or 210. And then in the late 70s, next slide, we moved to Ecuador for a couple of years. And I brought those cameras with me. And what you're seeing here is a series of photographs of an album page I made when we returned from Ecuador. Next slide. So I always start most of my talks with this artwork, because I think it's like, I had it for, you know, about 30 years before I made an artwork out of it, because I didn't know how to do that. And it really kind of connects to my practice in a really deep way. So the piece is called Karina's Pictures from Ecuador. And what I did was, in refinding this album, next slide, I really was kind of drawn towards this photograph on the left. Next slide. So this photograph, I was like, and I teach photography, so I'm like very attuned to like how to read a photograph. And I was like, what is going on with this photograph? Why did I take this, right? And so what you see here is my father and my sister and a homeless family on the street in Guayaquil, where we were living. And I didn't understand why I took the photograph. And I was about 9 when I took it. And so I realized that my father, who is American, Jewish of Eastern European descent, asked me to take the photograph in some way, or he asked me to do a project on the problems with Ecuador. And I realized that I was in this really, peculiar space of being both very comfortable and part of Ecuador, speaking Spanish, understanding the culture, through my family, but also having this kind of, first world perspective on Ecuador. But it was very, it was very naive, it was very innate. And so when my father said he wanted me to take a photograph of the homeless family, which ethically is really problematic, right? But when I did it, I photographed him and my sister and the family. So it really complicates the photograph, which is what made me do this piece. So next slide. So what I did is the album is mostly untouched, but I started adding some text to the text that was already there that was kind of based on my memories of living there. And I confess right now I'm in Ecuador, so that's what you hear in the background. And so in that way that album merges that my childhood with like my kind of consciousness as an artist, as a photographer even. My work tends to do that. And so I'm going to shift to the perilous journey of Maria Rosa Palacios, which is a 30-minute video. And I am going to show like a short clip. But this is the project that I showed at the Cuenca Biennial in 2016 that I worked with Dan Cameron on. And the piece, in that piece, what I did was, Maria Rosa Palacios was my great-grandmother, and she was from Chota, which is one of the 2 Afro-Ecuadorian regions in Ecuador. The other is Esmeraldas. And I knew that about Chota. And what happened is I realized, I knew she had come to Guayaquil to work as a domestic in about 1908, but I didn't know how she did that journey. And as I started to do research, I realized that, she did the journey in 1906 because my grandmother was born in Guayaquil in 1908. And so I realized that she did that journey before the railroad had been completed in Ecuador. And so that created this like a question and a kind of narrative of, how did she do the journey? How did people travel before railroad, before cars, right? Ecuador is a small country, but it's extremely diverse in terms of its topography. So the Chota is right near the Colombian border, and Guayaquil is on the coast, and she would have had to traverse the Andes, right? And so I figured out she probably followed a kind of route that was close to the railroad, which was also the route that the Incans had created when they created their own Inca road that went through the Andes from about the bottom of Colombia through Chile. So I reenact her journey. I'm just going to play a little bit because then I can kind of talk about it. In 1906, my great-grandmother, Maria Rosa Palacios, left her home in Chota and walked over the Andes to the port city of Guayaquil to work as a domestic. She was 14 years old.
I'm so sorry, guys. I'm going to start that over so that you don't have the little gray box.
Thanks, Malvika.
It's an important part of the film.
¿No le duele? Sí, es que está duro porque te le quitas Rosita, toca esperar. Hasta que suavice. Tráigala así. Ya.
Stop it now.
¿Y qué pasó cuando murió Rosa María?
Ah, cuando murió ella.
I love this part, but I think we should
Le
probably stop it.
hizo telegrama a mí.
Yeah, I love that part too. Maybe we can do it in a Q&A or show a little bit more. But yeah, that was beautiful, Karina. Thank you so much. And again, I asked everyone to do about 10 minutes, but knowing that it would be more than 10 minutes. And we have some good time left, but I want to cut quickly to Adán's work to make sure we get everybody in, at least in the first hour. So Adán, I got to know first through his work. I saw his art at the Venice Biennale. And the work he showed was absolutely one of the most hair-raising things I think I've ever seen in a biennial. It was a display case of human teeth that had been pulled out by evangelical missionaries, if I'm not mistaken, in Honduras, who as a, I'm going to say, front for their activities, offer free dentistry to villagers. And so this display in Venice was sort of almost a comment on, I took it first as cannibalism in a way, just this sort of forceful robbery of a person's, anatomy for what was purportedly goodwill. So I used that introduction to reach out to Adán, who lives in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. And I'll add a personal note. I've always been especially desirous of seeing the art in Honduras because I'm married to a Honduran and I visited the country multiple times for family reasons. But when I found Adán's work, I realized I'd stumbled onto a Honduras that I'd been looking for all along. So I invited him to participate in the California Pacific Triennial in 2013, and then in the Bienal de Cuenca in 2016. And he produced a expanded work for the first show and a brand new work for the second show. So I'm going to turn it right over to Adán so he can share that with you. Welcome, Adán.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the rest of the team from Ride Brooklyn to invite me. Remember, you visited me here before the triennial, the Pacific Triennial. You came to here to visit me and in my studio and in this village. I am living close to Tegucigalpa, the main city of Honduras. The name of the place is Loma Alta. It's a small village. The majority of the people are farmers. And I have my studio here, but I grew up in the border between Nicaragua and Honduras. And for me, it's so important, this exchange of raw materials and these mixes with the trade of commodities, no, in recent wars. But I'm gonna talk about two projects. One of them is raw materials. When Dan Cameron invited me for the Biennial of Cuenca in Ecuador, and I was enjoying the presentation of Flavio and Karina because there are a lot of things in common, no, in our country in different scales, no, because Brazil is huge, Ecuador is for us is huge. Honduras is a small country in Central America, but we had a lot of things in common, no? And this topic about the exchange of raw materials and industrial materials with third world countries and the first world countries, no? And my project for this Cuenca Biennial, it was raw materials. I went to the Valle del Chota also to get resources, no, in the place. And I went to Esmeraldas also, these two African Ecuadorian communities in the north of the country, close to the border of between Colombia and Ecuador. And I discovered this history, you know, about the Valle del Chota communities. They are enslaved people, no? They produce sugar cane in this area to produce sugar, no? And I try to put together these two realities, no? Del Valle del Chota and Esmeraldas. In Esmeraldas, now the communities produce cocoa beans, no, for make this wonderful and famous Ecuadorian chocolate. And these raw materials put together to talk about of my experience traveling around these two African Ecuadorian communities, no, and how the commodities occurs, no, in this exchange of raw materials. And in the zone of Esmeraldas, these communities, they never has been slaves, because they are similar, the they are descendant from the liberty slaver, no, they took these boats and go to the coast of Ecuador, and they never has been slaves, no. And but in the Valle del Chota, the people came here from Africa. They were slaves, no, with this order, Franciscanos order from the church, Catholic Church. They have these big factories to produce sugar, no, during the colonial period. And now it's a very strong community in the cultural way, no, but there are a lot of poverty in this area also. And for me, it's important to mix this other producer, no, in other aesthetics way. For example, in this video installation, there is a video with this musician Isidro Minda. They are making music with the orange leaf. It's so beautiful sound, because they make music with this orange leaf, and to remind this indigenous influence in the area. And then I wrote with chocolate this phrase: el que no tiene de Inga tiene de Mandinga. And
You'll
it's
have
like
to translate for us.
yes, it's like if you don't have indigenous blood, you have black blood, no, means something like that, no? And the society of Cuenca is so proud of their colonial roots, no? And for me, it was important to make this dialogue, no, of these other communities. They don't have a strong presence in the city, no, and in the context of this colonial proud, no. And I made another project before. The name of the project is Topographies. Can you show the other image, please? It is one of my large scale projects. I made this piece or these pieces with inner tubes. These inner tubes is a kind of third world technology, because it's cheaper, it's more cheaper to buy a new inner tubes to put in the damaged wheel, no? And there are very common here, and the people repair again and again these inner tubes, no? And two concepts are so important in my practice: sediments and waste. And these concepts are linked with my own background, no, and my family. My mother recycle and reuse all the time, because she was a kindergarten teacher in the public school, and she always was teaching to the children to make toys and games with reused materials, no? And for me, it's important this difference, no? The difference of recycled and the reuse, because recycled for me is more about this recent philosophy, no? This ecological vision, no, for the planet, but reuse is more linked to the survival strategy, no? And in my family, that is it was so common. For example, my first experience making a new notebook, removing the old and used pages and a spiral to make a new one. That was my first experience of reuse during my childhood, no? And for, and it was a working class family experience, no? And this kind of experience marked you for the rest of your life, no? And for me, these two concepts are so important, but in the last years, I was more focused in the raw materials chains, because it's linked also with my own family history, no? My two grandfathers, they were working in, one of them in the minery, these USA companies in Honduras, and the other, the father of my mother, he was working in the banana plantation in the North Coast, in these USA companies in the country, no? And for me, it's important to make this kind of resource. In, for example, I went to Michoacan to travel around the avocado plantation to make this recent project about this specific raw material, no? And other things that mark me is, for example, the fight of Berta Cáceres, this environmental woman, no, who was murdered in 2016 in March, no? And in my country, this fight is so present, no? There are a lot of communities fighting for the natural resources against the big foreign companies, no? And this is another topic is important in my practice. And
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Adán. That was really beautiful. Well, I just want to note that we're getting up onto 1 o'clock here, and I had sort of carved out time for me to ask all of you questions, but I'm almost thinking that having brought all of you together, maybe it's better as a host to let my guests talk among themselves. I mean, I think that there's a certain response that you're having to each other's work. And without putting anybody on the spot, I was wondering if any of you did want to sort of remark on sort of points of connection that you're feeling. Oops, I put you on the spot. Flavio? Oh.
You know, I feel like if you've put them on the spot, I might jump in if that's quite
Go
all
ahead.
right. But,
Go ahead.
thank you so much. I wanted to thank you all for coming onto this program and sharing such beautiful and thoughtful and cyclical work. I'm so excited for this conversation, and if it's okay, Dan, I think you should feel free to, the four of you to take the next half hour for your crosstalk. But I wanted to say so much that Adán, your work in particular reminded me so much of, in Hindi, there's an idea of jugaad, which is like in English, incorrectly translates as MacGyvering, but the way that in the third world, and I mean that politically, not in terms of poverty, but in terms of solidarities, but like in the third world, there's this idea of reuse and recycling. Like even the thing you were saying, Flavio, about the thing that was being said earlier about making music with the orange leaf, and what does that sound like, and those kinds of indigenous practices. What you were saying about reuse is linked to survival strategies was making me think so much about how, like in India, you can go and get your comforter, your blanket refluffed in the market. Someone will come to your house and will recast your pots for you. Your chairs are sort of in the place where my grandparents live. Your chairs are provided by the government. They're beautiful but very cheap, and afterwards they're supposed to go back to the state to be used as kindling. That there is a kind of, I was thinking about, there is a kind of politics of the third world and a kind of politics of reuse that I think comes together sometimes because of like negative political reasons, but also for very positive political reasons as well. And I was wondering if, you each have such different experiences, if you could talk about that a little bit. That's my selfish question.
Was there anybody in particular you wanted to answer that, Alva?
I think whoever feels compelled.
I think my personal point of view, I think it's hard to compare with another countries, but in Brazil, it's hard to understand because we have a very, very hard problem because corruption, and in our country want to be a US, in terms of a lifestyle or looks like, and our president, our president now, Bolsonaro, have a lot of connection with Donald Trump, and they have a lot of scandal, and we have crossing a very, very complicated situation with COVID-19. I think I'm not changing I don't know if I answered correctly your question, but I think it's important to say. So yeah, it's hard because I asking for everybody how much costs one life, because our president speculation and is involved in a scandal of corruption, because he asking for buying vaccines, asking for $1 for vaccines. He didn't buy the vaccines because he asking for Pfizer and another companies to asking for $1 each vaccine, each shot for buying the vaccine, and he didn't buy. So he passed more than 500,000 deaths here in Brazil of coronavirus, of COVID-19. So is our everything is under the carpet, because we have a lot of things involved with, for example, we have a religion party in our government. It's hard to believe, because one part of to make a decision is a evangelical party. In Brazil, we call the bancada evangélica, because he make a decision about who take the decision in our country is talk to is decided for a religious party. So the companies are, for example, are selling for America, for United States company, So Brazil is like a big farmer, continues being a farmer for the eyes of for the globe, because we have a lot of resource like water, like the fruit. I mean the South America in general, and the globe want to explore continue to explore this resource. You know, so because okay, the Latin Americans from the eyes of the globe is the friendly people and they like parties, you know. As a Brazilian, people love samba or carnival is a friendly people. Okay, I'm a friendly people. I'm like carnival too, but it's not only this, you know. So people continues vandalizing our country in terms of selling and make an agreement to make some group of people take advantages of this, you know, because we are a third world, because a lot of meaning to be considered that, you know, it's not our fault, because is a fault of, because it's a human issues, because another countries want to be advantage of us as Latin Americans, as you know, is because we have oil, we have fruits, we have food for the globe, you know. For example, in Brazil, we sell the food, the meat and grains for the China. Okay, so you have to pay the price in dollars, because we have to sell for the Chinese people, to Chinese community. We have to sell, and the people from here have to pay in not in dollar, because the price is very expensive. One minimum salary here in Brazil is about $200 US, and people have to pay bills. People have to pay bills. People have to buy food, to give education for family. So you know, it's very hard to believe, and to be, to just to look at that, without to do nothing, you know, because another countries as USA and some countries in America take advantage of us, you know. It's hard to talk for a America audience this, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because as a Brazilian, it's sad, because okay, we were a colonized country. We weren't anymore. Okay, you have to give back this and follow word. So it's hard, because a lot of things, a lot of companies control the market of the food, the market of the oil, the market of a lot of things here in South America.
All right, well, Flavio, I think we're going to cut to the Q&A now, because we are now starting to get some questions pouring in. But yeah, I was actually going to, I thought where you were going with that was actually going to be about sort of how each of you pointed to a family history and a sort of a lineage that led up to, you know, you becoming, not so much becoming artists, but sort of how you created the subject matter of the work. But I got a signal from Malvika that we got a couple of questions that she wants to go ahead with. Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'm going to turn the mic over to her.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan. Flavio, no, I completely agree. And thank you. Like, there is a discomfort to coming. I feel this daily, but I do think there is a discomfort to coming to the programs of U.S. Empire, right? And having to give, like, you know, polite little identity politics talks in a digestible format. And at the same time, right, it is like relevant and vital. And so thank you for coming on, because, you know, these are the data points that people need. So we
Sorry for move away. Sorry.
No, it's okay, but it's not a moving away, it's a moving towards. So our first question, which is really fascinating, is coming from our friend in the audience whose name is DML9, at least name on Zoom is DML9. My friend, I'm inviting you to turn on your microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is this a lot? I thought you were going to read my question. I thought all the presentations were really quite marvelous and really wonderful. But I think the connection that I saw between the three works was representations of continental diasporic Africans. And so my question was about what I'm noticing in the work I see here is a different treatment of continental African subjectivities that is unique to how American Blacks might deal with that representation. I don't know if that makes sense to the artist who made the work and anybody on the talk, but could you maybe, some of you, all of you, talk more specifically about your connection with continental Africa and why and how it appears in your practice? I think that's pretty much, I think that's the question. I think that American Black artists deal with African subjectivity in a much different manner that feels more, I don't know. Is that helpful? That's where I'm at. Okay, thanks.
Extremely helpful, thank you. And I think because of the sound quality, the question is, can each of you speak a little bit more directly about the African diaspora, your relationship to it in your work, how it might differ from, place to place or personally?
I'm super interested in this subject, and I think it's because I've grown up and spent so much time in the US and have a kind of consciousness around identity and the African diaspora through that experience, yet also understanding the African diaspora through my own family history as a kind of not a contrast, but as a juxtaposition. So also understanding, and I wonder if there's, and I feel like Flavio and both Adán kind of talked about this, is like the kind of understanding around colorism. And I think I'm really interested in audience and how, my work around the African diaspora is understood in different contexts, right? In different kind of connection, that what I see as the kind of invisibility of the the Afro-Ecuadorian experience in Ecuador, which I think Adán was also talking about. There's a kind of invisibility, and yet, as Flavio was saying, like everyone's like mixed race or has some kind of trace, right? And like my piece is about that, right? Like I'm sort of ambiguous. I, definitely kind of pass for white, but I'm not. But, those kinds of issues, how, one is perceived in their own country versus in the US. I'm sort of interested in those issues. I'm not sure if you guys are as much, but I know you show your work globally. So I'm interested how that connection with race happens across, across continents.
Yeah, in Brazil is my point of view about Brazil, because in Brazil is the country that have more Black people outside the Africa continent. And the Brazilian country have 55% of Brazilian people is considered Black people, Black or brown people. We have these contracts because they have a lot of issues because the invisibility of the skin color. If you have when you say, we have this conversation before, when the skin color is darker, the society is more perverse. The police, the society looks like as an enemy, and is invisibility is more present in this life, because we have in the Latin America in general, we have the mixed race because the process of colonization. So we have a lot of slavery period, very long in Brazil, 300 years. Brazil was the last country to abolish slavery, is the fact. So and in this brings a lot of a lot of scares in the country. So, and in the Africa diaspora is a part of our life as a Brazilian in general, because not in political or society, but in our culture, in our food, in our way to live, because they bring is impregnated in our culture, in our day by day. So for us, it's part of our life to Africa diaspora, because as we say, because we have a state here. I don't know if you have the opportunity to came here and visit Bahia. Bahia is like a small Africa, because maybe 90% or maybe more the people that live and born in that city is Black people, you know. So you have a very diversity of because Brazilians have a continental scale. So it's hard to talk about Brazil living in Southwest, because you have a North and Northwest. You know, you have a continental distance. So, but in general terms, we have this is every day. Afro-diaspora is part of our life. Everybody, as USA used to say, that one bloody drop.
Blood.
One bloody drop. You have, every Brazilian have more than almost 80%, maybe more, have the one drop blood. You know. So we are part of this is part of our life, our culture.
I just want to jump in. I want to give Adán a chance to address the question, but I was thinking about it a little bit more, and from my reading, and it's very incomplete, it seems that a lot of sort of the African, back to Africa, if you want, readings and ideology of the 19th century was actually part of a broader abolitionist movement, and Africa was presented in a way as an alternative, as something to think about. While I'm not aware of that kind of philosophy happening in, African Brazil or African Ecuador, African Peru, what I am aware of, especially in Brazil and in Cuba, is the broad popularity of syncretist religions, which are actually African practices brought over whole cloth and duplicated and practiced, with variations, obviously, by millions and millions of people today. So while the reference to Africa may not seem as explicit in verbal or textual terms, I do believe that when you visit Rio or Bahia or Havana, you will see that there is a notion of Africa that is quite distinct from the notion that most people in the United States, I think, have today. But that's all I want to say. I want to see if Adán maybe wants to weigh in a little bit on this question.
Dan, maybe Sambo Creek in Honduras or Triunfo de la Cruz
Sambo
also.
Creek, yeah.
Well, in my case, the presence of the African roots, came from my childhood because it was a process to understand me. It's like a resource, a personal resource, because I never feel in the way of the white people in general, always I feel different, and maybe that it was a reason I wanted to study sociology, to understand more this ethnicity, or these mixes of cultures in my family. For example, in all my family, the people is so diverse, because some of them looks like Black people, some of them more indigenous. In my case, sometimes the people look at me like a Black man or like indigenous or mestizo, and this intuition, I recently I made this DNN test, no, to know more about me, my heritage, no, my roots, and this suspicious was confirmed, no, because just an 40 4% of my heritage came from Spain. The rest came from Africa and America, no? Indigenous blood and African blood, no? The main percent of my heritage came from these different areas of the world, no? And that is, for me, it's a very important reasons to have this interest in African roots and indigenous roots, because it's like a personal resource, no, in my life.
Great.
I love that so much, Adán. And I also want to highlight, on these themes of kind of cosmopolitanism, multiculturalism, the interweaving of our ethnic identities, a comment that Nancy Helgedson put in the chat, which is very interesting. She wrote, "I'm interested in the palenques in South America, where indigenous and African people escaped slavery by creating many hidden communities together in dense jungle areas, several of which survive today." And she describes these, I think about, for instance, like Portobello runaway slave colonies and how these become, vibrant resources to their own communities, but also just sitting in the US, how many artists we've had on this program, Black artists who will describe going, to visit, to stay, and what a rich source of cultural meaning that is to others in the diaspora. So really, thank you so much food for thought. I know we have just a few minutes left, so for our next question, we'll go to the wonderful British Venezuelan art historian, curator, and friend Cecilia Fajardo Hill.
Yay!
Cecilia.
Hi, hello.
Hello, Cecilia.
Hi, Cecilia.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? So my question is, I've always feel a little bit constrained when I hear the issue of ethnicity spoken in terms of blood quota and all of this. And also because, we have a very long history of discussions of ethnicity coming from the multicultural era, which are very colonial. So, the issue of intersectionality is important, the issue of indigeneity and so forth is incredibly complex and specific one. So we are speaking from the US about the practice of 3 artists, one from Brazil, one from Honduras, and I will say a Latinx artist of Afro-Ecuadorian origin. So for me, we have a shared history of colonialism. For example, let's think of Adán's work. Is ethnicity the main terminology, the main concept through which to read his work? How is it that we can articulate your conceptual and material operations? So I would like you to just, explain, there is a larger umbrella of ethnicity in the sense, yeah, we are diverse. We don't come from a US white, whatever background, but what does it actually mean in terms of the work? Does it mean Adán's work in terms of all these kind of multiple layers, cultural layers in it? So not to move away from ethnicity, but to make it specific from the heart inside out without having to label it that. Thank you.
Well, for me, is thank you, Cecilia, and I am so happy to see you here. And thank you for your question. For me, it's like a survival strategy, but very high in my work, because for me the aesthetic part, the formal part of the resolution of my projects or my pieces is so important. But for me, it's a kind of spiritual part of my process. I am not interested to be a very literal, or talking about my pedigree, in my work. For me, it's more important to to have this part of my work hide in my process, because it's the motor of my practice, no? But I don't feel good when I have to present my results like an mestizo artist, or like an artist so proud of of his roots, no? I don't know if you understand me, but for me it's a very high part of my process, but it's so important because it's so spiritual. I am discovering all the time new things around it, this motor, no?
I totally agree, Adán. I think, you know, if the ethnicity or identity is maybe like an entry point, like I think of my family as, you know, that experience, that tension of like, you know, living in Latin America and the US, and kind of being between places in some way as a kind of way that I understand the world and that I make work coming from that place, right? I think that's like the authentic place where I'm at, where I'm trying to make the work. And then it does seem like, you know, then the kind of pigeonholing ends up getting attached to that, right? But I think the work has to come from the, you know, the experience and the place. And I hope that it addresses more than just, you know, my family history, right? Like I don't want it to be hermetic. I want those kinds of connections, the messiness of identity. That's not pure. That you know, really really speaks to that idea of ethnicity, right? That it's not it can't be, you know, clearly defined within a box. And so I make work that makes sense to me rather than trying to like fit a box. I don't know if I answered your question or where you were getting at with it.
No, yeah, completely. I just feel that there is such a long history in the US of pigeonholing in the sense that it's a very, you know, so that's why I mentioned the word specificity. At the end of the day, every work has this sort of medulla specificity, which cannot be defined in this kind of grand general terms, you know, in this sort of colonial terms. So the ethnicity is immediately sort of associated to notions of someone being different, when there's nothing more ethnic than a white, sort of, I don't know, sort of New Yorker. So that's what I mean, you know, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly, like Dan. So this ethnicity is not just, it cannot be simply pigeonholed to notions of diversity because someone is not a sort of white American or white British or white European person. The ethnic belongs to anybody. So by removing away from this kind of general colonial approach to the ethnic, then it becomes an operation about the sort of personal things that come out into the work that then reveal personal histories, personal materialities. And for me, decoloniality, the decolonial does not begin from the big term of the ethnic. It begins from the personal and this kind of contextual into this kind of universe of this kind of the discussion of ideas. That's, I mean, I'm not in disagreement with anything. I'm just want to be wary of the danger of having to discuss this in terms of, you know, I'm a little bit Black, I'm a little bit indigenous. You know, I find myself sometime in the US having to justify that even though I look white, I'm not white because I had a brown father and I'm this and that. And I find that this is very difficult. You cannot justify your place in society or in the art world in those terms. I think we need to just be very careful so that it doesn't mean an anthropological notion, which is simply colonial. Thank you. So I did agree with what you were saying. Also understand.
I don't want to sound like I'm speaking up in defense of my own choice of a topic. I guess one of the things I wanted to make clear at the beginning was that I was inspired very much by discussions in the United States last year, kind of in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, and a sort of a spark of rising awareness on the part of people in the United States about the complexity of our own racial and cultural history. So that was my starting point. My other starting point is that I am always frustrated with the dumbing down, or the oversimplification of what Latin American means to people in the United States, and specifically to people in the art world in the United States, who tend to, I think, broadly, say, oh yeah, okay, those are Spanish people down there. Those, this, and so this frustration on my part, that I can't seem to get my fellow United States curators or colleagues seriously interested in the topic of Latin American art in any way. So I thought, well, maybe one point of connection is by touching on this topic, because I would never want to suggest that my interest in Flavio's work or Karina's work or Adán's work has to do with their quote unquote racial or ethnic identity. Not in any way, shape, or form. My experience with their work, however, has caused me to return to, I would say, antiquated, inherited beliefs about identity and how it figures into art. And so, rather than pigeonholing, I think what I was trying to do was sort of say, let's take these 3 points, if I may, on the map of artistic production, and let each one tell a story about their work, and then see how this comes together to hopefully complicate in a positive way conversations going forward on this topic. I hope that helps.
But
Yeah, thank you.
but for us, it's important to know where we came from, no? To understand has in a personal resource, I don't know. But if you don't want to put in your words, that is your choice, no?
Truly, I think this is a good instance of that it's not an either or, it's an and. And I think that a lot of very useful matter has been said. I'd love to, because we have just a few minutes, I'd love to go to my colleague Catherine with our next question. And you should be able to turn on your microphone at will.
Thanks. I have a question about community. I'm just noticing this common thread between each of our artists today. This common thread of community. I'm thinking specifically of what Flavio was saying about the diversity of Brazil due to colonization, and Karina, what you were talking about with family as entry point to making your work. And then Adán with what you were saying about the exchange of raw materials. I'd love to hear each of you talk about or elaborate on the importance of community and also collaboration in your work. Maybe Adán, if you want to start.
Well, I decided to live in Honduras. It's so difficult for any artist live here because the contemporary art sense is so weak, no? But for me, it's important to be in dialogue with my community, and I am also I am making some collective projects with other artists here. For example, this performance festival, Reunion is the name of the performance festival. And we organize this festival in collaboration with artists and people from Switzerland and Honduras. But the festival is here in Honduras. We made the festival each 2 years, no? And we try to make the festival in the countryside, each editions. for example. And all the time I am linked with collective projects, doing things and discussions here, because I don't know, the people here in Honduras is so curious people, and they love contemporary art, but the institutions, there are a few institutions that support artists. Is so complicated making art here and to be an artist here, but I am happy doing this kind of projects here and collaborations with other colleagues and exchange with people from other countries, no? Because to maintain the contemporary art spirit here. And I worked in jails, for example, with people in jails, or with children's, different kind of education art programs, but more in small scales, no?
I mean, I'm happy to talk about the wonderful community of artists here in Ecuador, and I know Dan can attest to that when he was in the process of curating the Cuenca Biennial, and this is, I'll try not to make it too long, but in 2007 I went to El Museo del Barrio, and the invited country was Ecuador, and Rodolfo Cronfle was the curator, and the artist's work was really amazing. And my connection going to Ecuador, you know, over the years has been with my family, and that was, you know, my community, and that's, you know, so much of my work comes out of that. But I also got to know the artists that he showed, and they're my friends, and I'm part of this incredible, vibrant, wonderful community with all of the, you know, issues of what it means to be an artist, and marginalized, and all of that also here. But the work and the, you know, intellectual rigor is, I just feel very lucky to be part of that, to be part of multiple communities, to have, you know, a wonderful arts community in New York, but also have this really incredible art community here in Ecuador as well.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be a little greedy and seize the final question for my own. But Karina, I feel like we've barely spoken about your film, which was such a highlight and such a blessing of this conversation. I guess my question is really about legacy, and it is a question for everyone on the panel, and many in the audience. But I feel like I'm so intrigued by this question of generations, and you kind of reenacting, with the perilous journey of Maria Rosa Palacios, reenacting her perilous journey, but casting yourself, you know, possibly outside of her role, and kind of the process of how just the craft process of how you created those scenes, how you decided what, you know, what the stage for her perilous journey would be. I guess my question is also a bit, I'm sensing themes of cyclical time, that you're disrupting nonlinear systems, this idea of like Sankofa, that you go back to return, that just this idea that we are in systems that are cyclical, right? And I guess I was wondering if, you know, I would love to give you an opportunity to speak a little bit about circularity and how this film came to be before we close out.
Or I'll try to
Thank you.
sum it up. Well, it took a long time. It was 5 years in the making, and what we cut it off right when I was it's a hybrid piece, so it's like part performance, part documentary, and definitely has like a breaking of the fourth wall every once in a while, like the making of the piece kind of comes through. And a lot of it addresses like transportation, like all the different ways she would have had to travel. And there was a break in my family, but I was able to find a living relative who I interview about my great grandmother, who she actually died this year, like a few months ago, Nora Victoria. But she remembered everyone. She remembered my grandmother. She remembered my great grandmother. She remembered my grandfather. And that's really the starting point. So the piece really starts there. And I kind of put myself in the space of, you know, that space of like, well, what is kind of some of the questions that Dan and Cecilia and Adán were talking about, like what does it mean to be of Afro-Ecuadorian heritage? What does that look like? You know, this weird way that we perceive color, right? And so I kind of awkwardly reenact this, clearly not her, but trying to engage with that history and all the other histories that opens up really about place, because it's all the character that's not, you know, a person is the landscape, and that landscape holds that history. So, you know, it's that engagement through the place to connect and kind of collapse the time frames of the present and the past.
Thank you so much. I love the way you phrase that about the landscape and the history that is held in it. I just want to highlight, we're having some very interesting dialogue happening in the chat right now. From Nancy, this idea that decolonization should challenge falling into a pigeonhole and transform it into a portal. A lot of love and thank yous to the artists and for Dan for bringing everyone together. You know, and Lydia Rubio's point I found very interesting, that we should be mindful not to fall into the label of, into the practice of labeling whole art practices by ethnicity, that roots are always an influence in complex art practice, not its totality. Cecilia Fajardo-Hill brings up that, you know, there is a form of pigeonholing in approaching ethnicity as well, and this shows up in, you know, last year's landmark protests, which is something, you know, I think about constantly as well, is how much white folks in the United States co-opt Black grief. So I think, you know, hopefully the first of many conversations. Thank you all so much. This has been really beautiful and also very generous. So at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending with poetry. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of this day, Celina Su, to the stage. Celina was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and lives in Brooklyn, part of unceded Lenape-Hoking. Her first book of poetry, Landia, was published by Belladonna in 2018. I'll drop a link in the chat in just a moment. And beyond Landia, she's published 2 poetry chapbooks, 3 books on the politics of social policy and civil society, making her very qualified for this conversation. And her work has been published in the New York Times Magazine, N+1, Harper's, and elsewhere. Her creative, scholarly research and pedagogical work focuses on the everyday struggles for collective governance, centering economic democracy and racial justice. And she is in urban studies. She's a chair in urban studies and a professor of political science at the City University of New York. Give it up for the most qualified person, Celina Su.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Malvika. Thank you, Flavio, Karina, Adán, and Dan for that illuminating conversation, and to Anselm Berrigan for including the poems I'm going to read from by Sarah Riggs and me in the July-August issue of the Brooklyn Rail. And thanks to everyone at the Rail for having me, and to all of you for being here. So Sarah Riggs wrote me a letter poem, and I'm just going to read my response to her letter, but I wanted to give you just a little bit of context. Her piece is dated April 2018, and the first line of her poem is, "The kick would come, almost a cup or a cup." And this is the kind of thing I'm telling you that I don't usually write down. The line, her first line refers to a cup of blood. I suddenly bled while in a mall in Fez. I was 5 months pregnant and scared that I was losing the fetus that would become my daughter, who will turn 3 years old next week. The scare turned out to be a hematoma. And although Sarah wrote her letter in 2018, I didn't see it until earlier this year. So seeing her letter was led to a rush of memories, plus this live person to tell me the exact passage of time. And I wasn't going to mention more, but after the really lovely panel we just listened to, I wanted to mention some continuities and preoccupations, despite me being outside of the visual art world. In particular, my letter references a conversation Sarah and I had with the writer Miguel Arsanios, in which Miguel and I reflect on our family histories as entry points into some questions on migration, political economy, and solidarities. And we question how we should think about specific memories from childhoods in Venezuela and Brazil, respectively. For instance, we realized that our mothers, who have both passed away, were both obsessed with gemology and semi-precious stones as investments amidst high inflation that they hid in little bags in the closet. And just what to do with all these often fraught memories. And last thing, because we have an international audience, I'll also just mention that Section 8 vouchers are American US public subsidies for housing. February 2nd, 2021. Dear Sarah, between the lines of your poem, A Gift, I recall that hyperventilating taxi ride through the outskirts of Fez, as if she had been born by cesarean. This morning, the aforementioned Kick spies a steel water tower on a building across the street, declares affection for the robot. The crunch of her boots sinking into the creme brulee of one-day-old snow. In my mind's eye, the rhythms of lap swimming at the Y under fluorescent lights, your ink line drawings projected behind you in the second floor manuscripts room of the public library, the sensation of the escalator en route. Almost moving away for a year to be with a grandmother, and in the meantime, the oud. In the meantime, fleeing Los Angeles to rescue a language. This year of purgatory is crowned unprecedented, but no pigs fly outside my window. So I attempt to interrogate exactly which logics are now suspended and how many simply slip on cloaks of invisibility. On blankets shared on the north end of the park lawn, in galleries accompanied by the whooshing of Jan's balloons filling with air, of Elena's sewing machines threading palindromes across generations and continents. This afternoon, she points to the rooster felt doll, or as she calls it, the chicken with a heart-shaped hat. For Lunar New Year, my father's girlfriend gives my daughter a red envelope with a $100 bill. I am not allowed to refuse it, even though she just gave a 2-year-old more than a day's wages. She has been on the waiting list for Section 8 housing vouchers for more than a decade. A grammar of survival, a syntax of lagniappe. I think of her subway commute, ensconced in our respective homes, grappling in this longest months for the semblance of a pattern of grief. Who among us travels, performs hours of waged care? A sentence becomes a kind of privilege, research as devotion. I long for conspicuous absence, this presence of willful abstention in our onion-skinned histories of the immediate, resistance to the seduction of despair. In our virtual real rectangles with you, Muriel and I hopscotch, motherless mothers without mother tongues. Our memory palaces packed with many digit inflation rates and annotations of South American semi-precious stones, with impossible knots of material belonging, perhaps with Oshallah, as my childhood neighbors would say. each time I think of Candomblé. Tonight, we turn off our table lamps. When we hear a whirring sound, the toddler announces, "It's not a star, it's an airplane." The night sky fills the bedroom with a bright pink, snow reflecting. This, too, is winter. You write a snow shower of poems. Make room for coffee, email, podcasts, Zoom accordions of your work. Each gesture a correspondence, each paragraph an attunement, a community in the whispers of our various lullabies, names like pronouns, relational rather than absolute. If what belongs to you is yours, what belongs to me is mine. Thank you so much.
Wow. Celina Su, everyone, give it up. Look at that brilliance. That's what happens when you study rigorously for years and years. Thank you so much, Celina. And thank you so much, Flavio, Adán, Karina, and of course, Dan, for bringing us all together here in this space. I think, truly unique discourse. Really happy to have shared the space with all of you via Zoom. As always, we'll share the recording of today's program on our archives as well as on YouTube, so it will be available in a day or two if ever you'd like to revisit this conversation. And please join us again tomorrow when we're joined by artist Greg Bordowitz in conversation with the Rail's own Yassi Alipour and Nick Bennett, and we'll conclude with a musical performance by Laszlo Horvath. Really looking forward to that. That will be, as always, at 1 p.m. right here in the Zoom. But other than that, thank you all so much. This has been fantastic, and I'll invite you to turn on your microphones now if you'd like to say hello to one another, or goodbye on your way out, or anything else you feel compelled. But this was really so special. Thank you.
Thank you, Malvika. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Dan, so sharp.
Dan, thanks, Don. Karina,
Dan.
So brilliant.
Malvika.
And Cecilia, so brilliant. Everyone is so brilliant.
See you again, Karina.
Listen, but I'm
Thumbs up, Dan.
Love this. Love this.
Dan, you are the best.
Hi, Kevin. Hello.
This is so fun.
This is amazing.
Guys, Julia, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.